Hi, I'm Valerie Engelhart. In this video, I am going to be painting a loose watercolor iris using a few colors to give it a prismatic look. So I've got my reference image off to the side, and I have sped this video up to about 150% because otherwise it was going just a little too slowly. So I work without a sketch, and right now I am just using Daniel Smith Imperial Purple and my size 8 round silver black velvet brush to paint in those top petals first. Now I don't know if you see it, but I have placed some water drops on my page. There's a bit of reflection in the light. And I've done that to measure where the petals should be placed so that I don't make things too big. And I just use clean water because, well, one, if I messed up with my placement, I can just dry those drops and try again. And another reason is whenever I hit them with my paint, it'll flood in. It's a nice way to measure without using a pencil. So I did drop in some manganese blue hue to cool down some of the shadow areas of those petals, and I am now using a thirsty brush to lift off some of that pigment to create some of those really gentle folds. And I like to do that while the paint is still wet, not sopping wet. You want it to be more like damp, because if it's just wet, all of the pigment that's already around it will just flood in. So you do want a thirsty brush, and you want the paint to be slightly dry so that you actually get that lift. And it just makes things kind of gentle and dreamy. I'm gonna go in with a little bit of Rhodonite Genuine now and just pop that in. One thing I really love about the Imperial Purple is it is a color that splits. And by that I mean when there's a lot of water added, it splits into like some pink and some blue. It's got a couple different pigments, PB19 and PB29. And it creates a very beautiful texture without me having to do extra work. I'm softening the edges of some of the petals because I don't typically like all of my edges to be hard. I like lost and found edges. It really works for that dreamy style I like to achieve. Now, because those petals have dried a bit, I do need to use a little bit of scrubbing motion with my brush just to loosen that hard line. And now, while everything is still damp, I'm adding a little bit of that Imperial Purple to create like the center vein of those upper petals. And between those petals is one more petal that's behind them. I don't want to actually paint that petal because it is very light in value. So all I am doing is going in with clean water and letting it touch each of the side petals. And by doing that, it will diffuse them a bit so I can drag some of that pigment to where it's like almost imperceptible, but it is still darker than the white paper. And I'm going to start adding in some of that cadmium yellow now. It's better to add it before I start adding the purple to the lower petals, I find, just because, well, one, cadmium yellow is like a bully. It will push things out of the way. It is very heavy. The other reason is I'm going to be using a lot of purple. Yellow and purple are complementary colors. They are opposites on the color wheel. And so if you mess with them too much, they can create a dull, muddy color. And I don't want that, but I do want to use them together. So it just takes a little forethought. So my brush is a little bit dry, so I'm dry brushing and flicking my brush on the side to create that bearded texture. All right, going much heavier with the pigment now, I am painting the bottom of where I'm anticipating the petal to be, and then with just clean water, moving that pigment upward. Now that seems a little counterintuitive because I do have my paper at an angle so that water flows downwards. But wherever I've put that pigment, it is now there, but everything will flow downwards, thus creating more shadow toward the bottom. Right now I'm dragging some of that pigment from the far left petal into the center, and I'm just placing that center petal using water, and then doing the same for the far right. With the same idea, if I hate the placement, I can tap it dry and it's no problem. I've not committed to anything. but it allows that left petal to diffuse and merge into the center in a nice, well, loose and atmospheric style. Dropping it a little more yellow now, just so that it can move a little bit more with the water. Before, there wasn't a lot of movement going on because the paper was dry. Dropping it into a wet area very thoughtfully allows it to softly diffuse, giving it a lovely glow. And then same thing as I did with the left petal. I've got my brush to the side. Notice how I'm holding it at the very end. This gives me very loose strokes. That way I'm not working too tightly. And I am moving my brush in the direction that I see the ruffles of the petals. And let's take a quick moment to look at that petal on the far left. Do you see that purple pigment starting to separate? That's what this pigment does, and it is gorgeous. And right now, everything looks really light in value, and that is because this is really just the first wash. Watercolor is meant to be layered, as I think many mediums are supposed to be, but I can really only speak to watercolor. And that is, we are setting up a map. We are setting up an emotion, a feeling of where we're going to take this later. So if you're at this stage and you're thinking, oh, it's too light, it's too loose, it looks nothing like what I'm thinking it's going to be. Of course it's not. You can't get it there yet because we're still only at the beginning. All right, want to connect these petals, but just in a couple of spots. And because this is Arches cold pressed watercolor paper, the paint will stay wet on it for quite some time. However, I do want to call out that climate has a lot to do with that, and I live in a cooler climate by the sea. If you are out in the desert, you might not get the same results as me because your paper will likely dry much faster. And that's okay. That's why, even though watching tutorials is great, I'm able to learn a lot just by watching someone else paint. You really won't get what you need unless you practice. And I know that's really annoying to hear when people are like, hey, how do you get so good at painting? And they're like, well, I just paint a lot. And I get it. That's frustrating because you probably want to know a little bit more, like, well, what techniques do you use or what exercises? But sometimes it really is just a lot of play and seeing what works for where they live and how they like to work. And not everyone's a teacher. Not everyone knows how to explain their process. So anyway, right petal, I mostly used pink over there and then just dropped a little bit of that purple to, again, create some like shadow and depth as if the petal is curving away from the light and softening some edges. I'm being careful not to add clean water to that bead at the bottom of the right petal because I don't want all of that pigment flowing into the wet area. If you do that, all of that pigment is going to keep flowing downwards, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but I know that's what will happen then, that it's not really what I want. Going in now with some undersea green. Irises have like these bulbs where new irises will sprout and where the petals sprout from. And as I paint it, I think it looks very strange, even though I'm looking at my reference photo and I'm sizing things up, but it looks so strange to me. Now, of course, you can take some artistic liberty and maybe you don't paint it exactly like you see in the reference photo. But I did want to get pretty close to what an iris looks like, even if I'm not painting a botanical representation. I'm not a scientific painter, nor am I completely even a realist. So I could have changed it, but I wanted to try being a little more accurate. So I'm dropping some purple into that green bulb, and the reason I started with the green and then went to the purple is when a new color is introduced, it spreads. So if I made it all purple and then introduced the green, honestly, that probably would have looked good too. I just decided to go with that option. Also, because there isn't a lot of green in my painting, the fact that I added it there, it means I wanted to give it a little more presence towards the bottom. And I'm not sure that was necessarily the right call. It was just the call I made at the time. And then, of course, I drop in some yellow, drop in some pink, because I don't want it to be so starkly green. I want there to be some variation, and I mean, the top is so beautiful and diffused. I want some of that beauty down below, even if it's not the focal point. I still want it to look like it belongs with the bloom. All right, that first wash has dried. I did remove my painting from my block because I wanted to work on another painting and I needed my block for that. And in fact, even though this is looking very pretty, especially being able to look at this in the future, I was ready to throw this painting away. I saw it and I was like, I'm not feeling it. No, I'm gonna get rid of it. So let this be a lesson. For starters, you saw the thumbnail when you clicked on this video. It does turn out okay. Work past the ugly stage. And I can even hear some people right now like, this is the ugly stage? Well, to me, I guess I'd been too close to it. Maybe I needed to take more of a break. But yeah, to me, I was not feeling this. But I decided to push through because I thought it would be a good way, well, one, for me, like, it's good for me to get practice in. That's like the point. And I thought maybe I could show all of you that even I'd get discouraged. But I was able to push past it. And there is some freedom in painting on a painting you intend to throw away. Because I was like, well, I'm getting rid of it anyway. What's the harm in continuing to work and just see what happens? It allows you to work bolder. I'm not afraid to make a mistake at this point because I'm just going to trash it. You can't really make a mistake on something you're trashing. And that does bring more creative freedom. And a nice thing about using this really nice paper is I say that I was going to trash it. I wasn't literally going to, but I was going to turn it around and paint on the back. What was I going to paint on the back? Who knows? But because this is a really good quality paper, I could do that and it would look fine. It's kind of cool how many like really nice paintings I have that are actually on the back of failed paintings. So if you're using this good paper and you do have a painting you don't like, don't throw it away. Use it to experiment. And then once you've used up one side, flip it around, paint on the other side. I would only discourage it if maybe I'd used like acrylic mediums or something. But I didn't. This is all watercolor. I didn't even use gouache on this piece. This is all pure watercolor. No salt, no cling film, just pigment and brush marks. And look at how slowly this is still being built up. Like, I've got this video sped up. It's okay to take your time. Enjoy the process. This really is meant to be fun. Now, this painting actually serves a purpose. Oh, I went and squeezed a little bit of quinacridone gold on the side because cadmium yellow on its own is really flat. And if you just keep layering cadmium yellow on cadmium yellow, you're not going to really get any depth or variation. So quinacridone gold is a fantastic way to add some texture and depth. It is one of my colors that I cannot live without. So if you don't have quinacridone gold, highly recommend it. It is definitely one of my favorite and one of my go-tos. But as I was saying before, this piece was actually a practice piece for one of the lessons as part of my Watercolor Fearless Florals course. And this course is a 6-week course where we paint a variety of flowers, typically doing one study, so this would be considered the study, and then doing another composition with more of a loose, splashy wash painted on like a background. So if that's something you're interested in, I've got a link in the description below. Enrollment is already closed for the latest session, at least at the time I'm filming this, but I do plan to launch it again soon. Well, let's finish this round first and then go for it again. All right, back to those brush strokes using the side of my brush. And because this was going for the bin, I was fine with using really strong color. So that left side of the center petal is in shadow. Well, I want that shadow to be a bold blue, so I put in bold blue. No one can stop me, so why not have some fun? And I really like how that right petal's turning out. Just a couple strong lines of pink. You don't need to do a lot. Watercolor really is magical and practically paints itself. By using directional brush strokes and having a few strong, bold lines, our minds can fill in the rest. And even on the left petal here, it was looking a little flat. Just throw in a few bold lines, bleed some of the area away. Presto, lovely folds. And I'm coming near the end of the flower on top, so I'm just going through, strengthening some values, adding little pops of color for visual interest. I wouldn't say I'm fiddling at this point. I really am just trying to push things a little to see how far I can get where it's still loose and I like it, but going just, I wouldn't say crazy, but I call it a prism orchid because it makes me think of like light going through a crystal. Okay, so that like bulb under the flower, I definitely thought it was looking weird, so I, earlier in the video, used a lot of water to like loosen the edges, make them kind of bleed and diffuse, right? And so now I'm going in with hard lines using the undersea green and now dropping in some purple for shadow. And so if you've got a really wet diffused area and then you go on top with confident hard lines in a darker value, it won't look like a mistake. It'll look like you were being confident, but you were just creating, well, atmosphere, which is one of the things I like to do in my work. But of course, too many hard lines in one area when the rest of the piece has a mix of hard and soft will be a distraction. So some hard lines equal good. If I had just put all hard lines there when the rest of the piece is a little loose, that would not be so good because it would be distracting and the eye would go there versus where I want it to go. You want your greatest range of values to be at your focal point. And my focal point, I would say, is that center petal of the lower petals. That would be my focal point. But that doesn't mean ignore everything else. Like music, sure, a soloist is great, but gosh, whenever you have the whole band working together, it is magic. Well, the same as in a painting. Sure, my focal point is very important, but there's an entire story to tell. And I want to tell a story that is wonderful from beginning to end, top to bottom, left to right. It's important for the focal point to shine, be the hero of the piece, but the hero needs some help. And it might be hard to see, but let's take a moment. I want to appreciate that bloom I got where the bud meets the stem because it makes it look like it's actually coming from the front. And that's not something I planned for. That was the watercolor just doing its own magic. And then one nice thing about painting loosely is that I can roll with it. I grabbed some purple and I dotted around that center beard to, again, bring more attention to that area, greater depth. Yellow and purple are opposites, the opposite of light and dark. That combination is what helps draw the eye in. And at this point, the painting's mostly done. I'm just going in and putting in some final touches. And sometimes you hit a point where it's actually better to put your reference image away so that you can pay more attention to what the painting needs, not getting distracted by trying to make it look like a picture. All right, last little bit here. This iris is actually very beautiful. I would normally probably just call it there and be done, but a lot of irises, if not all irises, have those like little veins or like those little stripes that kind of come out from that bearded area. And so I decided to paint those in. So I've grabbed my liner brush, I'm using that purple, and keeping an eye on the reference image because I have a problem with painting these kind of lines. I don't know why. Like I'll make them look fine, but just when I see them, I don't know, I just don't usually like them when I paint them. So I have grabbed my size 8 brush. It's just got a little bit of water on it, and I'm softening some of those lines. The reason I'm doing that is, remember earlier when I was painting that like underbulb area and I was talking about how having too many hard lines can be distracting? Because these two petals are not my focal point, I do want them there. It is important for me to put those in because it helps tell the story that this is an iris, I know what an iris looks like. And I don't want to soften all of them because then I look like I wasn't confident. But I want to soften it just enough that it looks diffused. But I want them to be prominent enough that I know it's an iris, but also they kind of point towards that center focal point where I'm putting all of the detail and contrast. And these are just things that as you grow as an artist, you will have your own way of doing things. Maybe you love painting in all of those little stripy details in all their glory, and you make it look fantastic, and you know what? More power to you. Do that. But that's not really my jam. So I'm gonna paint this way. And that's okay. You don't want to paint exactly like me. Take the techniques I give you, run with it. Get that brush wet. Go make a mess. Go make a beautiful mess. And here's the finished painting. So if you liked this video and want to join my Fearless Florals course in its next launch, go down to the link in the description below and join the waitlist. And if you liked this video, press that like button so I know to make more like it. And if there's anything you want to see me paint, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for new subjects. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye.